So we have different properties of real numbers, and I'm just going to try to go through these, and then we'll show you some examples of how you can use it. But the commutative property of addition says if you have a plus b, that's the same thing as b plus a. So you can switch them around in addition, it doesn't matter what order. For multiplication, we have a times b equals b times a. Again, the order doesn't matter in how you multiply it. And that's the commutative property. Associative property for addition says if you have a plus b plus c, but you have parentheses around the b plus c, so like you're adding b plus c and then you're going to add it to a, that's the same thing as if you had a plus b added together and then you added the c. Now, these properties so far, they don't work for subtraction or division, but they do work for addition and multiplication. So we say it's an associative property. It doesn't matter if you've got a string of addition, it doesn't matter which two you add together first. For multiplication, it looks like this. So you could multiply the b and c and then times the a, or you could multiply a and b and then times the c. All right, the distributive property. So that's kind of an interesting one. If you have something you want to multiply and you have addition or subtraction inside, you can distribute. So we say a times b, this equals a times b plus a times c. And it's called the distributive property of multiplication over addition. And it looks like that. Or you could also have it over subtraction, and that would be AB minus AC. You could write that. They don't usually write them separate, but they could. An identity property. Well, an identity is when you have an operation and you perform it with a particular real number. In this case, we're working with real numbers, and it doesn't change the real number. So for addition, the identity is 0 because a plus 0 is going to equal a. Like you're not going to change anything by adding 0. Actually, you could have that for subtraction as well, a minus 0. Oh, I take it back. Forget what I said about subtraction. It has to work the other way. So also, and by that I mean with the commutative property. So 0 plus a is also equal to a. Okay, so that's the addition. Identity is 0. For multiplication, what can you multiply and not change the number? It's 1. So these are identities. This is the addition identity. It's 0. And the multiplication, or we say the multiplicative identity. That's a fun word to say, multiplicative. The multiplicative identity is 1 because a times 1 is equal to a, and 1 times a is also equal to a. Okay, so those are identities, one for addition and one for multiplication. Inverse properties. So an inverse property is if you take a number, and it's, say for addition, plus something, and you get the identity. Okay, now that something is, in this case, it's the opposite of a, right? So if I take 7 plus negative 7, I get 0, right? And it's also working the other way. If I have the opposite of a plus a, that also equals 0, okay? So that's how the inverse property works. So the inverse of a is the opposite of a. So if I said, hey, in addition, what's the inverse of 9? You would say negative 9. Okay. Now we also have one for multiplication. So if I have a number times something, and I want it to equal the identity for multiplication, which is 1, what is that something? Well, it's 1 over a, right? We call that the reciprocal of a. All right. So if I multiply a times 1 over a, I get the identity for multiplication, which is 1. So if I said, what's the inverse, the multiplicative inverse of 2, you would say the multiplicative inverse is 1/2. Now let's carry this a little bit. It's kind of a long video. But let's say I had 1/3. What's the multiplicative inverse of 1/3? that would be 3. Because if you multiply those, you're going to get 1. All right, so let me write the other part here. 1 over a times a is also equal to 1. Now, let's get a little trickier. What if I had negative 3/7? What would be the multiplicative inverse? It would be negative 7/3. Okay, so we're talking about that reciprocal. If you multiply those, oops, I don't know what that is. If you multiply negative 3/7 times negative 7/3, you're going to get 1, a positive 1. Okay, so that's fun stuff.